Most congressional hearings fade into the background, but every so often one cracks open the hidden machinery of power in Washington. Behind the polite exchanges and procedural language, this one revealed a tug-of-war over who really calls the shots, Congress or the Attorney General. On the surface, it was about budgets, mergers, and grants, but beneath, a quiet battle over law, money, and authority, with billions at stake and communities caught in the middle. And it all started when Senator Chris Van Hollen asked one deceptively simple question Pam Bondi wasn't ready to answer. It began with a proposal that sounded harmless enough.
I recognize Senator Van Hollen for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General Bondi. The Department of Justice is supposed to play a vital role in defending our Constitution, upholding the rule of law, and keeping the American people safe. Unfortunately, it's currently failing on all these fronts, and this budget request will make a bad situation even worse. We are witnessing a level of lawlessness from this administration that is unprecedented in scale and scope. Indeed, when asked, President Trump said he didn't know whether he was required to comply with the Constitution of the United States. Instead of defending the rule of law, DOJ attorneys are being deployed to aid and abet in lawbreaking. Like just yesterday, Madam Attorney General, when the administration took, I believe, the unprecedented step of suing all the Maryland Federal District Court judges because of actions they took to protect habeas corpus and the constitutional right of due process. To date, the administration has faced nearly 300 legal challenges in federal courts. There are currently in place a huge number of preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders issued by judges appointed by presidents of both parties, including appointed by President Trump. At the same time, patriotic career civil servants have been fired for upholding their constitutional oaths. In January, the then acting Attorney General fired more than a dozen prosecutors simply because they had been assigned to work with Special Counsel Jack Smith. And dozens of others have also been wrongfully terminated. And you picked up where the acting Attorney General left off when you fired the pardon attorney after she declined to restore the gun rights to a close friend of President Trump with a domestic violence conviction. Perhaps most troubling, Madam Attorney General, is you have fired attorneys like the acting Deputy Director of the Office of Immigration Litigation simply for telling the truth in court. As he said yesterday, the whistleblower, in a complaint filed, quote, "I didn't sign up to lie." That sends a terrible message to every DOJ attorney who wants to both do their job and uphold their professional ethics and integrity. While spending taxpayer resources to defend this lawbreaking, the administration has proposed a budget that is a gift to our foreign adversaries, to the drug cartels, and to illegal firearms traffickers. Why do I say that? Let's look at each of those categories. On your first day, you disbanded the FBI Foreign Influence Task Force Office, which was established to combat secret malign influence campaigns by China, Russia, and other adversaries. On that day, you also restricted the scope of criminal charges under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Your budget cuts the Drug Enforcement Administration and eliminates funding for the organized crime drug enforcement task forces, which coordinate interagency efforts to combat the worst drug trafficking cartels. And you're effectively dismantling efforts to go after illegal gun traffickers by attempting to dissolve the ATF. At the same time, this budget undermines local law enforcement by stripping away funding that's critical to protecting our local schools and reducing violent crime in rural communities. And many organizations that help the victims of crimes are running out of their fiscal year 25 funds because, for example, the Office of Justice Programs has only posted one grant solicitation for 2025. Meanwhile, under the guise of efficiency, your budget proposes to combine and significantly cut the 3 distinct DOJ grant-making agencies, including the Office on Violence Against Women, which you propose to slash by 30%. There is nothing efficient about reducing services to victims of crime. Your budget also indicates that transparency and integrity are not priorities of the Justice Department. Over the last 5 months, you've decimated the public integrity section, Public reports indicate that this office went from 30 attorneys to as few as 5. Your budget would also slash the department's oversight watchdog, the Office of Inspector General, by $42 million. Inspector General Horowitz told me that these cuts would result in the elimination of 140 positions, which would bring investigations to a halt and interfere with the IG's ability to conduct oversight of the department. I would note that it was an OIG investigation that helped uncover the FBI's serious mishandling of allegations of sexual abuse against former USA gymnastics physician Larry Nassar. Why target these key areas of public integrity, oversight, and accountability? So, Attorney General Bondi, I hope you'll answer our questions today. I say that because your department has failed to respond to any of the 9 inquiries I have made and have responded to only 2 of 38 letters sent by my colleagues, the ranking members of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, Senator Durbin and Congressman Raskin. So, Madam Attorney General, we have much to discuss this morning. I look forward to your testimony.
Place the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives under the same operational umbrella as the Drug Enforcement Administration. Bondi painted it as a common-sense reform. Less bureaucracy at the top, more agents back on the street, better coordination between 2 agencies often chasing the same criminals. It was an easy sell on paper. Who wouldn't want law enforcement working more efficiently? But Van Hollen wasn't interested in the sales pitch. He wanted to know something else entirely. Would she follow appropriations law, which under current statutes requires Congress to authorize this kind of merger? Bondi's answer was layered. She promised they would follow the law, but in the same breath she insisted no congressional action was actually needed. It was, she said, just an internal reorganization, no change in the brands of the agencies, just a new shared umbrella. To the casual listener, that might have sounded like reassurance, but to anyone who understands how Washington works, it set off alarms. Because in government, an internal reorganization isn't always internal. Moving 2 agencies with separate budgets under a single operational command changes more than the org chart. It shifts funding flows, oversight structures, and the balance of power. Van Hollen pressed again, repeating that current appropriations law requires Congress to approve the merger. Bondi didn't budge. They would complete the reorganization, she said, and they wouldn't break the law. But she never conceded that congressional approval was necessary. This wasn't just a disagreement over a management decision. It was about whether the executive branch can restructure agencies, with all the budget implications that entails, without the legislature's sign-off. And that's where the real stakes came into focus. Because if you strip away the jargon, the question was simple: does efficiency trump the Constitution? The Appropriations Clause gives Congress exclusive power over federal spending. If the DOJ can reconfigure major agencies under the banner of efficiency without congressional approval, it's not just a shortcut, it's a precedent, one that future administrations of either party could exploit to sidestep legislative oversight entirely. And once that door is open, closing it again is nearly impossible. But the hearing didn't stop there. It moved to another flashpoint: hate crime programs. Van Hollen, while acknowledging Bondi's stated commitment to prosecuting hate crimes, pointed out that her proposed budget completely eliminated funding for 3 key initiatives: the Hate Crimes Training Program, the Shepard Bird Hate Crimes Program, and the Jabara Hayer No Hate Act. These weren't obscure line items. They were targeted efforts designed to improve training, reporting, and prevention in communities hit hardest by bias-motivated violence. Cutting them wasn't just a budgetary choice. It was, in Van Hollen's words, a statement of priorities. Bondi's response was vague. She had the program details in front of her, she said, and was willing to discuss them further. But she offered no defense of the cuts, no argument for reallocating the money elsewhere, and no promise to restore the funding. To critics, this looked like sidestepping the political heat without committing to a position. To supporters, it was a smart move to avoid getting locked into a contentious funding fight. But to the communities that rely on those programs, the message was unsettling. Your protection might be conditional. And then came the money. Not hypothetical budgets or proposed cuts, but real dollars. About $811 million already promised through DOJ grants now frozen. Van Hollen drew a sharp line between 2 categories: First, the previously obligated grants. These were awards that had already gone through the full process. Recipients had met eligibility requirements and been approved and budgeted for the funds, and yet they were still waiting. Some had been waiting for years. Second, the future grants, the notices of funding opportunities for the current fiscal year that hadn't been issued yet. Without them, organizations that depend on DOJ support couldn't plan, hire, or operate effectively. Bondi acknowledged the distinction. On the future grants, she said they'd be announced soon, on a rolling basis. On the frozen grants, her answer was less satisfying. Some were tied up in litigation, she said, and she couldn't speak in detail about ongoing cases. But Van Hollen wasn't just worried about the delays. He was worried about the process, or lack of one, for getting them unfrozen. That's where things took a sharper turn. Bondi had previously suggested that recipients could call their member of Congress to help resolve grant issues. Van Hollen pushed back hard. That kind of system, he argued, rewards those with political connections and leaves everyone else behind. Not everyone can just pick up the phone and get their representative involved. It's not fair, it's not transparent, and it turns grant distribution into something that looks less like a standardized process and more like political patronage. Bondi countered that citizens had called as well, but that didn't address the core issue. Without a clear public process, access becomes uneven. And when access is uneven, trust erodes. Organizations begin to question whether merit or politics determines who gets federal money. Over time, that suspicion can be as damaging as the delays themselves. Taken together, these three issues, the ATF-DEA merger, the hate crime program cuts, and the frozen grants, were more than separate policy disputes. They were points along the same axis, the balance between executive flexibility and legislative authority, between administrative efficiency and democratic accountability. On paper, streamlining might save time and money, but in practice, it can also shift power in ways that weaken oversight. Cutting programs might free up funds, but it can also signal to vulnerable communities that their protection isn't guaranteed. Delaying grants might be a temporary setback, but without a fair and transparent process, it chips away at the principle of equal treatment. And that's what made this hearing more than just a routine exchange. It wasn't about whether agents should work together, or whether a specific program should get funding, or whether a grant should be delayed. It was about how decisions like those get made, who has the authority to make them, and what safeguards exist to keep that authority in check. Van Hollen played his role with a calm but persistent style, framing his questions as requests for clarity rather than direct challenges. It was a strategy that kept the conversation from turning into a partisan shouting match, but still put the pressure exactly where it needed to be. Bondi leaned on pragmatism, emphasizing public safety and operational efficiency, painting her moves as common sense. Her framing made it harder to criticize the policies without seeming to oppose safer streets or better coordination. But her unwillingness to give straight answers on congressional approval, her lack of commitment on restoring hate crime funding, and her vague defense of the grant process all left open questions. Questions that go to the heart of how government operates and how it should operate. The real lesson here is that oversight isn't optional. It's not political theater. It's one of the few tools Congress has to check executive power, and when those checks are bypassed in the name of efficiency, it's rarely a one-time thing. Each small shift makes the next one easier, until the balance of power looks nothing like what the Constitution intended. That's not just a risk for one party or one administration. It's a risk for the system itself. So when you watch a hearing like this, don't just listen to the words. Listen for the gaps, the half-answers, the quiet redefinitions of terms like internal reorganization or rolling basis. That's where the real story often hides. And it's in those moments that you see how quickly power can move, and how hard it can be to move it back. If you think this kind of deep dive into the real battles behind the headlines matters, don't just scroll past. Subscribe, share this with someone who cares about how government really works, and let me know in the comments which part of this hearing shocked you most, because this fight over law, money, and power is only getting started.